My name is Dana. I am 39 years old. And the day my family sat around a restaurant table and told me I had never sacrificed for them, I had a binder in my bag that was going to end that conversation permanently. I did not open it right away. I have learned that timing is everything. Not anger, not volume. Timing. Timing. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I tell you what was in that binder, I need to tell you what it cost me to build it. Because the documents inside did not appear from nowhere. They were assembled slowly, over 6 years, by a woman who had already survived the hardest thing she would ever face, completely alone, and had decided, quietly, that she would never be caught unprepared again. That woman is me. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. If you have ever sat in a hospital room and realized that not one person who was supposed to love you had shown up, you are going to understand every single beat of what comes next. Drop the word surgery in the comments right now. I read every one. Make sure you are subscribed, because what happens in the next hour is what 6 years of patience, documentation, and silence finally built toward. It is worth staying for. Let me take you back to the fall I turned 33. I was working as an occupational therapist at a rehabilitation center outside of Columbus, Ohio. I had been in that role for 4 years. I was good at it. I helped people relearn how to button shirts, how to hold forks, how to write their names again after strokes and accidents had taken those things from them. I understood, professionally, what it meant to rebuild. I was raising my son, Marcus, on my own. He was 6 years old that fall. His father had been out of the picture since Marcus was 18 months, and I had structured my life around making sure Marcus never felt the gap. I worked early shifts. I arranged my schedule around school pickup. On weekends, we went to the library, the park, the free museum days. We were a team of two, and we were solid. My family, my parents and my two brothers, Kevin and Jason, lived 40 minutes away. We saw each other on holidays and a handful of Sundays throughout the year. I would not describe us as close. I would describe us as functional, which for a long time I thought was enough. In September of that year, I began having headaches that did not respond to anything. Not ibuprofen, not sleep, not hydration. They arrived without warning and sat behind my left eye like something pressing outward from the inside. After 3 weeks, I went to my doctor. After 2 MRIs and a referral, I sat in a neurologist's office and was told I had a meningioma, a tumor growing along the lining of my brain. The word tumor changes a room. It changes the air in it. It changes the way your hands look sitting in your lap. The neurologist was calm and thorough. He explained that meningiomas are typically benign, that mine was not cancerous, but that it was large enough and positioned in a way that surgery was necessary. He used the phrase significant procedure. He explained recovery time. He explained what could go wrong. I drove home. I picked Marcus up from school. I made dinner. And then, after he was asleep, I sat at my kitchen table and called my mother. I told her everything the doctor had told me. The tumor, the surgery, the 6 to 8 week recovery, the fact that I would need someone to watch Marcus while I was in the hospital and for the first 2 weeks afterward. My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Dana, you have always had a flair for the dramatic." I did not respond right away. I asked her to repeat herself. She said she was sure the doctors were being thorough, but that I had always tended to catastrophize and that maybe I should get a second opinion before I started alarming the whole family. I got off the phone. I sat with that for a while. I called Kevin the next morning. He said he had a busy quarter at work and that he trusted I would figure out the logistics. Jason texted back 4 hours later. "That sounds stressful. Keep us posted." My father did not call at all. I arranged everything myself. My neighbor, a retired teacher named Gloria, agreed to take Marcus for the hospital stay and the first week of recovery. I organized my medical leave. I prepared a binder for Marcus's school, his schedule, his allergies, his pickup authorization. I packed my own hospital bag. The surgery was on a Tuesday in November. Not one member of my family came. I remember lying in pre-op, watching the ceiling tiles pass as they rolled my gurney down the corridor and thinking, I need to remember this, not to punish anyone, just to remember it accurately, because someday, someone is going to revise this story, and I am going to need the facts. I was right about that. It took 6 years. But I was right about that. It took 6 years. I grew up in a house where love was conditional and effort was invisible. That is not a dramatic statement. It is just the most accurate one I have found after 39 years of trying to describe my family to therapists, to friends, to myself, at 2 in the morning when the old patterns surface, and I have to name them before they name me. My father, Robert, worked in commercial insurance. He was good at his job and proud of that. He measured people the way he measured policies, by their yield. What did they produce? What did they cost? Where did they cost? Where did they fall on the ledger? He applied this framework to his children without appearing to notice he was doing it. Kevin, my oldest brother, was the yield. He went into finance, made money early, and gave my father something to reference at dinner parties. Jason, the middle child, was quieter, but played baseball through college and gave my father something to attend. I was the youngest. I was a girl. I became a therapist, which my father once described, at Thanksgiving, as a job for people who couldn't get into medical school. I had, in fact, applied to medical school. I did not get in the first time, and the second year I tried, I had a breakdown that I did not fully understand until I was 26 and a counselor helped me identify it as anxiety that had been building since childhood and had simply run out of room. I left the pre-med track. I reoriented. I found occupational therapy, and I found that I was genuinely good at it, and for a long time I made the mistake of hoping that being good at something visible would be enough to shift my family's perception of me. It was not. My mother, Patricia, operated as my father's echo. She did not contradict him in front of the family. She softened his edges in private and then reproduced his conclusions in public, so that by the time a verdict reached me, "You are too sensitive. You worry too much. You always make things harder than they are," it had been laundered through her voice and arrived sounding like concern. She was not cruel. That is important to say. She was not a cruel woman. She simply prioritized the peace of the household over the truth of any individual in it. And I was the individual most frequently sacrificed for that peace. Marcus's father, Derek, had been charming in the way that certain people are charming. Completely. And only at the beginning. He left when Marcus was 18 months old and has contributed to his son's life primarily through the occasional birthday card and one missed court date regarding child support. I do not spend energy on Derek. He is a fact, not a wound. What Derek's departure did do was confirm my family's quiet verdict on me. Kevin said, at a Sunday dinner shortly after, that I had always picked wrong. My mother said nothing, which was its own kind of comment. My father was not at that dinner. He had a golf thing. I rebuilt. That is what I do. I returned to work when Marcus was 8 weeks old, with Gloria watching him for the first months, and I built a life that was self-sufficient by design. I did not ask my family for money. I did not ask them for childcare on a regular basis. I showed up at holidays, brought food, helped clean up, and drove home. I was also, during those years, quietly carrying something else. The headaches had been building for longer than I admitted in that first neurology appointment. There had been smaller symptoms in the year prior. A sensitivity to light, occasional blurred vision in my left eye, a fatigue that sleep did not touch. I'd attributed these to single parenting and early shifts and the general weight of holding a household together alone. I was good at explaining away my own symptoms. I had been trained to. When the diagnosis came, it clarified a lot of things, not just medically. It clarified what I had quietly suspected about my family for years, but had never been willing to write down. That when I was in genuine need, they would not be there. That their absence would not feel to them like abandonment. It would feel like me being dramatic, like me making things harder than they needed to be. And so I made a decision in the weeks between the diagnosis and the surgery date. I did not make it with bitterness. I made it the way I made most of my decisions at that point in my life, practically, and with Marcus in mind. I began keeping records, not in an obsessive way, not with any specific plan attached. Just the way a person who has been dismissed often enough starts to understand that her experience only becomes real to other people when it is written down, dated, and signed by someone official. I kept the diagnosis paperwork, the surgical consent forms, the hospital admission records, the itemized bills. And on the morning of my surgery, before they took my phone, I took a photograph of the hospital lobby clock. Time stamped. Tuesday, November 14th. 7:42 in the morning. Nobody from my family had called. I handed my phone to Gloria, kissed Marcus on the top of his head, and walked through the double doors. The surgery took 6 hours. I woke up alone. Recovery from brain surgery is not a single event. It is a long, unglamorous process that nobody prepares you for adequately, because the pamphlets focus on the procedure, and not the weeks that follow it, when the world feels slightly tilted and sounds arrive half a second late, and you cannot read for more than 20 minutes without your vision swimming. I was in the hospital for 4 days. Gloria brought Marcus to visit on day 2. He was 6 years old and very serious about the whole thing. He held my hand and told me that Gloria had let him have cereal for dinner, and that he had not told her the rule about vegetables. I told him that was acceptable given the circumstances. He seemed relieved. No one else came. On day 3, my mother called, not to say she was coming, to ask if I had someone to drive me home because she and my father had a dinner commitment on Friday that they had made months ago, and she wanted to make sure I had thought through the logistics. I told her Gloria would drive me. She said, "Good. You always land on your feet, Dana." I did not respond to that. I wrote it down later, word for word, in the small notebook I had started keeping in my nightstand. I came home on a Thursday. Gloria had stocked my refrigerator. Marcus had made me a drawing of a brain with a Band-Aid on it, which I framed and which still hangs in my hallway. My discharge papers listed the restrictions clearly. No driving for 3 weeks. No return to work for 6. Limited screen time. No heavy lifting. Follow-up appointments at 2 weeks and 6 weeks. I followed every instruction. Kevin called 11 days after the surgery. He asked how I was doing, and then, before I finished answering, mentioned that he was thinking about refinancing his investment property and wanted to know if I had any connections at the rehab center who could recommend a financial advisor. The call lasted 9 minutes. He did not ask about Marcus once. Jason texted a week after Kevin's call. His text said, "Heard you're doing better. Let me know if you need anything." I did need things. I needed someone to take Marcus to his Saturday soccer games for 4 weeks because I could not drive. I needed someone to sit with him on the 2 afternoons a week, when my headaches were bad enough that I needed to lie in a dark room. I needed, occasionally, someone to bring dinner, because standing at the stove for 40 minutes was still more than I could manage in the first 2 weeks. I did not ask my family for any of it. Gloria handled the soccer games. A colleague from work organized a meal train among my work friends that ran for 3 weeks. A woman from Marcus's school, whose name was Beth and who I had spoken to perhaps 4 times, dropped off soup on a Tuesday without being asked and left before I could thank her properly. My family did not appear. My father sent a card. It arrived 2.5 weeks after the surgery. It was a generic get-well card, the kind sold in pharmacy checkout lines, and his message inside read, "Hope you're bouncing back." Dad. I kept the card. I noted the postmark date. What happened over the following 6 years was not a single dramatic escalation. It was quieter than that, and in some ways harder to describe, because the specific cruelty of being dismissed by your own family is that it does not always arrive as an event. Sometimes it arrives as an event. Sometimes it arrives as an omission, a pattern. A series of moments where you are simply not accounted for. In the year following my surgery, my parents took Kevin and his wife to Italy for their anniversary. They also contributed $12,000 toward the down payment on Kevin's second home. When I mentioned, carefully, that I was struggling to cover Marcus's after-school program on my recovery salary, my mother said, "Dana, You really need to think more carefully about your financial planning. Jason got married 2 years after my surgery. I was not asked to be in the wedding party. My mother explained that Jason's wife, Courtney, had a lot of sisters. I bought them a gift from their registry. I attended. I sat at a table near the back with people I did not know and ate chicken and drove home. The following Christmas, my father made a toast. He thanked Kevin for being the backbone of this family. He thanked Jason for building something lasting. He looked at me once, briefly, raised his glass in a general way, and moved on. I smiled. I drove home. I wrote it down. I was building the binder before I knew I was building it. At first, it was just a folder on my laptop, scanned documents, saved receipts, a running note in my phone where I logged dates and quotes. Then it became a physical binder because I am an occupational therapist and I believe in systems that you can hold. I bought a 3-inch binder at an office supply store. I bought colored tabs. I organized it chronologically and by category. Tab 1, medical records. Surgery date, admission documents, discharge papers, follow-up reports. Tab 2, financial records. 6 years of tax returns, Marcus's school invoices, dental bills, the after-school program payments. Every expense I had covered for Marcus alone, totaled by year. Tab 3, the visitor log. That one was the hardest to obtain and the most important. Hospital visitor logs are part of a patient's administrative record, and under the right request process, a patient can obtain their own. I submitted the request 14 months after my surgery, when I first understood that my family would eventually try to rewrite this story. The log was 2 pages. Gloria's name appeared 4 times. My colleague Renata appeared once. Marcus appeared once, listed as a minor visitor accompanied by Gloria. The lines for family members, the lines where their names should have been, were blank. I put plastic sheet protectors on those 2 pages. I wanted them to stay perfect. 6 years is a long time to stay quiet. I want to be honest about that because I think people sometimes imagine that women like me, women who document, who wait, who do not react, are operating from a place of cold strategy from the very beginning. That is not how it works. The quiet is not a plan. It is a choice you make over and over again every time you calculate that the confrontation will cost you more than the silence, every time you decide that Marcus needs stability more than you need to be right, every time you drive home from a family dinner and sit in the parking lot of your apartment building for 10 minutes before going inside because you need the space between their world and yours. The quiet was not permanent. I always knew that. I just did not know what would finally end it. It started with Jason's restaurant. 3 years ago, Jason left his corporate job and opened a farm-to-table restaurant in a renovated space in the Short North neighborhood of Columbus. It was a beautiful space. I went to the soft opening. I ordered the duck. I left a 5-star review. The restaurant struggled from the beginning in ways that Jason was slow to acknowledge and fast to externalize. The kitchen staff turned over twice in the first year. The menu was too ambitious for the price point. He hired a manager who, it later emerged, had been skimming from the till for 7 months. Jason absorbed all of this without appearing to adjust his lifestyle in any visible way, which I noted but did not comment on. By the end of year 2, Jason needed money. The number he arrived at was $47,000. I know this because my mother called me on a Wednesday evening in March and told me that the family was getting together on Saturday to discuss supporting Jason through a difficult season and that she hoped I would come with an open mind and a generous spirit. I wrote down the date of that call. I wrote down her exact words. Then I went to Marcus's room, watched him do his homework for a few minutes, and thought about $47,000 and what it would mean for his college fund if I touched it. I went on Saturday. The meeting was held at my parents' house, in the dining room, around the table where we had eaten every Thanksgiving and Christmas of my life. My father sat at the head. My mother sat to his right. Kevin and his wife Stephanie sat across from Jason and Courtney. I sat at the far end, closest to the kitchen, which was where I had always sat. Jason presented the situation with a printed 1-page summary, which I thought was actually well organized. He explained the cash flow problem, the timeline, and the projected recovery if he received the capital injection. He said he was asking the family to collectively contribute $47,000, split proportionally, with a verbal agreement to repay within 3 years. My father nodded throughout. Kevin asked 2 questions about the repayment structure and then said he was in for $15,000. My mother looked at me. There was a moment, just a moment, where I thought the conversation might proceed reasonably. Then my father spoke. He said that he and my mother were prepared to contribute $20,000. He said that Kevin's $15,000 brought the total to $35,000. He looked down the table at me and said, "Dana, we need $12,000 from you to close the gap." I did not speak immediately. My father continued. He said that this was what families did, that they showed up for each other, that Jason had always been there when it counted, and that it was time for everyone to step up. I looked at Jason when he said that. Jason was looking at the table. My mother reached over and put her hand on top of mine. Her voice went soft, the way it did when she was about to say something she had already decided on. She said, "Dana, I know things had been hard for you. They have always been hard for you. But you have never really sacrificed for this family, not the way the rest of us have. This is your chance to be part of something." The room was quiet. Stephanie was looking at her water glass. Kevin was straightening his printed summary. Courtney had her hand on Jason's arm. And I sat at the end of that table, the end closest to the kitchen where I had always sat. And I thought about a Tuesday morning in November 6 years earlier. I thought about a gurney rolling down a corridor. I thought about a hospital lobby clock, time-stamped, and 2 blank pages in a plastic sheet protector, and a notebook filled with dates and quotes, and a 6-year record of every dollar I had spent and every room I had sat in alone. I thought about the word sacrifice. I thought about what it meant to the woman sitting next to me, whose hand was still on mine, warm and certain. The way hands are when they belong to people who have never once questioned their own version of events. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I reached down slowly and lifted my bag from the floor and set it on the table in front of me. I said, "Before I answer, I need everyone at this table to read something. I want to pause here for a moment. My mother just told me in front of my entire family that I'd never sacrificed for them. 6 years after she did not come to the hospital, after not one of them came. If you have ever sat in a room where everyone stayed quiet when they should have spoken, drop the word silent in the comments. I read everyone. And stay with me. What happens in the next 30 minutes is what 6 years of patience and 2 blank pages built toward. I need to take you back before I take you forward. Because the binder sitting on that dining room table did not arrive there by accident. It arrived there because of a decision I made 6 years earlier, on a Thursday afternoon in November, sitting in the passenger seat of Gloria's car on the way home from the hospital. With a bandage on my head and a discharge folder in my lap and a very specific kind of clarity that I have come to understand only arrives after you have been through something that should have broken you and didn't. Gloria was talking about something, the traffic, I think, or Marcus's soccer schedule, and I was looking out the window at the gray Ohio sky, and I was thinking about my mother's voice on the phone 3 days earlier. "You always land on your feet, Dana." I was thinking about my father's card, which I'd not received yet but would in 11 days. I was thinking about Kevin's call, which had not happened yet but would in 2 weeks, asking about financial advisors. I did not know the specifics then, but I knew the shape of what was coming. I had known that shape my entire life. I said to Gloria, quietly, without looking away from the window, "I need to start keeping better records." Gloria, who is 71 years old and was a middle school teacher for 34 years and has seen everything, said, "Then start." That was the beginning. The binder did not come together all at once. It grew the way most important things grow, incrementally, patiently, one document at a time, without a fixed destination, but with a clear purpose. I want to walk you through what was in it. Not because the contents are complicated, but because I think it matters to understand exactly how much ordinary, documented, irrefutable truth fits into a 3-inch binder when you have 6 years and a system. Tab 1 was the medical file. This was the foundation. The neurology referral, dated September 14th. The MRI report, dated September 14th. The MRI report, dated September 21st, with the radiologist's notes. The surgical consent form, signed by me and only me, because there was no family member present to witness, the hospital admission record. The operative report, 6 pages, describing a 4.5-hour procedure. The nursing notes from my 4-day stay. The discharge summary. The 2 follow-up reports from my 6-week and 3-month appointments. Every page was dated. Every page had my name on it. Every page was real. Tab 2 was the financial record. This section had taken the most time to compile because it required going back through 6 years of bank statements and receipts and school invoices and pulling out every expense that illustrated what I had been doing, quietly and alone, while my family was deciding I had never sacrificed for them. Marcus's after-school program, 6 years of monthly invoices, totaling just over $14,000. Marcus's dental and medical bills not covered by insurance, receipts going back to his 2nd year of life, totaling $9,400. The college savings account I had opened when Marcus was 3, statements showing consistent monthly contributions. Current balance of $31,000. Every Christmas gift I had purchased for every member of my family for 6 years, with amounts a running total of $4,200. The 2 family vacations I had contributed to, Kevin's 40th birthday weekend in Nashville, my parents' anniversary dinner, with my payment records attached. A single highlighted line at the bottom of the last page, which I had added 3 weeks before the family meeting, when my mother called me with her open mind and generous spirit request. The line read, "Total documented personal expenditure, 2018-2024, $67,400. Not including the surgery. Not including the surgery. Not including recovery. Not including the 6 weeks of partial pay while I healed alone." Tab 3 was the visitor log. 2 pages, official hospital letterhead. My name at the top, my admission date, my room number. The log of every individual who had entered my room during my 4-day stay. Gloria Simmons, 4 entries. Renata Park, 1 entry. Marcus Chen, minor, accompanied by Gloria Simmons, 1 entry. Family members, 0 entries. I had requested this document 14 months after the surgery, as I mentioned. What I did not mention is what prompted me to request it at that specific moment. It was a Sunday dinner, approximately 14 months post-surgery, at which my mother told a story about the surgery to her friend Carol, who had come for dessert. In the story my mother told, she described how worried the family had been, how hard it had been to wait for news, how relieved they all were when it went well. She told the story with complete conviction. Carol looked at me warmly and said, "You must have been so grateful to have your family there." I said, "Yes." I drove home. I submitted the visitor log request the following morning. Tab 4 was the notebook. This was the only section that was not official documentation. It was a small green notebook, 80 pages. College ruled, in which I had written dates and direct quotes and brief descriptions of specific incidents for 6 years. It was not exhaustive. I had not recorded everything. I had recorded the things that I knew, with a particular intuition of someone who has been gaslit since childhood, would eventually be denied. My mother's voice on the phone. 3 days post-surgery. "You always land on your feet, Dana." Dated November 17th. My father's card postmark, November 28th. Kevin's call, November 25th. Duration, 9 minutes. Topic pivoted to financial advisor request. At minute 4. The Christmas toast in which my father named Kevin and Jason and raised his glass vaguely in my direction, December 25th. The Sunday dinner story my mother told Carol, January 9th. And on the inside back cover of the notebook, which I had written the night I assembled the final binder, 1 week before the family meeting, a single line to myself, "You were there." You remember correctly. The documents agree with you. I had not planned to bring the binder to the family meeting. That is the honest answer. For most of the 6 years I had been building it, I had thought of it the way I thought of an insurance policy. Something you hope you never need. Something whose value is in existing rather than being deployed. But 3 nights before the meeting, after my mother's call, I sat at my kitchen table and I opened the binder, and I read it from the first page to the last. All of it. Slowly. And when I was done, I closed it, and I sat with my hands flat on the cover for a long time. I thought about my mother saying I had never sacrificed. I thought about the word generous. I thought about $47,000 and what it would mean for Marcus. Then I went to the closet, took out my good leather bag, the structured one with the wide base, the one that could hold a 3-inch binder without folding, and I packed it the night before. I did not tell anyone I was bringing it. I drove to my parents' house on Saturday morning. I parked on the street. I sat in the car for 2 minutes. Then I picked up the bag, walked to the front door, and rang the bell. I was ready. The dining room smelled the way it always smelled on family occasions. My mother's candles, the vanilla ones she ordered from a catalog every October and rationed through spring, and the particular warmth of a house that had been cleaned that morning, surfaces white, cushions straightened, the performance of order that my mother deployed whenever the family gathered around something important. She had set out a pitcher of water and glasses. She had put a small bowl of mixed nuts on the sideboard. These were the signals that the occasion was being taken seriously. I set my bag on the floor beside my chair at the far end of the table. Nobody looked at it. The meeting had begun pleasantly enough, in the way that meetings involving money always begin pleasantly, with a brief, careful warmth designed to make everyone feel that they are among people who love them, before the numbers arrive and complicate that feeling. My mother had made coffee. My father had shaken Kevin's hand at the door, which was how he greeted his sons, and hugged Courtney, which was how he greeted daughters-in-law. He had nodded at me. I had nodded back. We had been doing this exchange for 39 years, and had perfected it to the point of near invisibility. Jason looked tired. He was thinner than I had seen him at Christmas, and there was something careful about the way he was holding himself. The posture of a man who had practiced being calm in front of an audience and was using all of it now. I did not feel contempt for him. I understood what it was to hold yourself together in a room full of people who held an opinion of you. Courtney sat close to him. She had brought a plate of pastries, which sat untouched in the center of the table. Kevin had his phone face down beside his water glass, which was his version of being present. Stephanie had a notepad. I'd always appreciated Stephanie's notepads. They signaled that she took the practical seriously, which was more than I could say for most of the people in that room. My father called the meeting to order the way he always called things to order, not with any formal phrase but simply by straightening in his chair and letting the room orient itself around him. It was a skill he had developed over decades, the ability to claim authority through posture alone. I had watched him do it at Thanksgiving, and my brother's graduations, and my grandmother's funeral. He did it now. Jason walked through his presentation. I listened carefully, because I believe in listening carefully even when you already know the outcome of a conversation. He was clear about the numbers. The cash flow problem was real, and he presented it without minimizing or over-dramatizing, which I respected. The $47,000 figure was well-reasoned. The 3-year repayment timeline was optimistic but not impossible. When he finished, my father nodded with the particular gravity of a man who has already made his decision but wants it to appear considered. Kevin asked his 2 questions. My father announced his and my mother's contribution. Kevin committed his $15,000. Stephanie wrote something on her notepad without comment. Then my father looked at me. What happened next is important to describe accurately, because it did not happen the way confrontations happen in films, with a building score and a close-up and a single crystallizing line. It happened the way most real confrontations happen, which is to say, incrementally, and with an almost mundane confidence from the people who believed they were in control of it. My father said he needed $12,000 from me. Then he said the thing about families showing up. Then my mother put her hand on mine, and then she said it. You have never really sacrificed for this family. Not the way the rest of us have. This is your chance to be part of something. Let me tell you what a room full of people look like when they believe a verdict has been delivered and accepted. Kevin's shoulders dropped slightly, the release of a man who expected resistance and is relieved not to encounter it. Courtney's hand moved from Jason's arm to her coffee cup. My father leaned back in his chair by perhaps an inch, which for him was the equivalent of a standing ovation. My mother's hand stayed on mine, warm and certain, waiting for the nod. Only Stephanie was still. Her pen rested on her notepad. She was watching me with an expression I could not entirely read, but which I would later describe as the expression of someone who had decided to pay close attention. Nobody in that room believed I had anything. That is the detail I want you to hold on to. Not the arrogance alone. Arrogance is too simple a word for what was in that dining room. It was something more specific than arrogance. It was certainty. The settled, unexamined certainty of people who have never once been required to produce documentation for their version of events, because no one in their world has ever asked for any. They had revised the story so many times over so many years that the revision had become the memory. My mother had told the surgery story to Carol with complete conviction because she no longer had access to the original. The original had been replaced. I was the only person in that house who still had it. Organized by tab, protected by plastic sleeves, sitting in a 3-inch binder inside a structured leather bag on the floor beside my chair. I looked at my mother's hand on mine. I looked at my father at the head of the table. I looked at Jason, who was still looking at the surface in front of him, and I thought, he knows. He has always known. That is why he cannot look up. Then I reached down. I lifted the bag from the floor. I placed it on the table. I unzipped it slowly, without rushing, and I lifted the binder out and set it in front of me with both hands. It made a solid sound when it landed, the kind of sound a thing makes when it has weight and density and has been built over a long time. My mother's hand left mine. I looked at the table and said, "Before I answer, I need everyone here to read something." My father frowned slightly, the small frown of a man who has not been interrupted in a long time and is not certain what to do with it. "What is that?" he said. I placed my hand flat on the cover. 6 years, I said. That is what this is. The room did not go quiet all at once. It went quiet the way rooms do when something has been placed on a table that cannot be ignored. Gradually, and then completely, each person arriving at silence on their own timeline as they registered that something had shifted and they were not certain yet in which direction. My father's frown held. Kevin set down his water glass. Courtney looked at Jason, who had still not looked up. My mother had pulled her hand back to her own side of the table and was holding it in her lap with her other hand, the way she held things she was not sure what to do with. Stephanie's pen was still. The vanilla candles burned on the sideboard. I opened the binder. I had thought, in the days before this moment, about how I would do this. Whether I would speak through it, or let the documents carry it. Whether I would be brief or thorough. Whether I would look at my mother or my father or the table. What I had decided was this. I would not perform. I would not summarize. I would simply present, tab by tab, and allow each page to say what it had been waiting 6 years to say. I turned to tab 1. I slid the top document across the table toward my father. It was the surgical consent form, the one I had signed alone in a pre-op room on a Tuesday morning in November, in the absence of any family witness. My name was at the top. The date was printed clearly. The witness line, which should have held a family member's signature, held the name of a nurse I had never met before or since. I set that as my surgical consent form. November 14th, 2018. I signed it alone because there was no family member present. My father looked at it. He did not speak. I slid the next page across. The operative report, 6 pages, paper-clipped. I did not ask him to read all 6. I pointed to the first page, to the line that read, duration of procedure, 4 hours, 38 minutes, and to the line below it that read, patient arrived without family accompaniment. My mother said, "Dana, I am not finished," I said. My voice was level. I want to be precise about that because it matters. I was not cold. I was not trembling. I was the way I am when I am working, focused, methodical, moving through a process that I have prepared for and trust completely. I turned to tab 2. I had printed a single summary page for this section. One page, clean, with a table format I had built in a spreadsheet over 3 evenings the week before. I slid a copy to my father and a copy to Kevin because Kevin was the one who understood numbers and I wanted him to understand these ones. I said, Tab 2 is 6 years of financial records, Marcus's school invoices, medical bills, the college savings account I have been building since he was 3. Every Christmas gift I purchased for every person at this table. Every family expense I contributed to without being asked and without acknowledgement. I let them look at it. Kevin went still in a way I had not seen before. He was reading the numbers the way he read financial documents, line by line, without expression, but with a quality of attention that meant the information was landing. I gave them 30 seconds. Then I said, the total at the bottom is $67,400 over 6 years. As a single parent, on an occupational therapist's salary, without assistance from anyone in this room. My father looked up from the page. He said, Dana, that is your life. Those are your expenses. That has nothing to do with tab 3, I said. I did not raise my voice. I simply said it, and the clarity of it, the fact that there was a tab 3, that there was more, that this was a system and not an outburst, stopped him mid-sentence. I opened to tab 3. I removed the 2 pages in their plastic sheet protectors and placed them in the center of the table, where everyone could see them without passing them around. I had thought about this detail specifically. I wanted them face up, visible to everyone simultaneously, so that no one in the room could later claim they had not seen them. The pages were exactly what I described before. Official hospital letterhead, my name at the top, my room number, my admission date, the visitor log for the 4 days I spent in that hospital following a brain surgery that I had informed my entire family about 6 weeks in advance. Gloria Simmons, 4 entries. We're not a park, 1 entry. Marcus Chen, minor, accompanied by Gloria Simmons, 1 entry. Family members, 0 entries. The blank lines were very white against the official gray of the letterhead. Nobody spoke. I counted, internally, the way I had been trained during a mindfulness course I took in my 2nd year post-surgery. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. On 5, my mother made a sound. Not a word. A sound. The kind that lives at the back of the throat and arrives before language, before construction, before any decision about what to say. It was the sound of a person encountering something they cannot immediately reclassify. I looked at her. Her face had changed. Not dramatically. My mother was not a dramatic woman. But the quality of certainty that had been sitting in her expression since I walked through the door that morning was gone. In its place was something I had never seen on her face in 39 years. Not guilt, exactly. Something that preceded guilt. The moment before a person can no longer sustain their own version of events. I watched it arrive. I did not look away. Then I looked at my father. His jaw had set. His hands, which had been resting loosely on the table, were now flat against it, pressed down, the way hands press when a person is using the surface beneath them to stay steady. His color had not changed. My father was not a man whose color changed. But something behind his eyes had shifted, and I recognized it because I had been watching his eyes across tables my entire life. It was the shift that happened when he encountered information he could not manage. He looked at the visitor log for a long time. Then he looked at the visitor log for a long time. Then he looked at me. I said, "You told me that families show up for each other. I want to make sure we are all working from the same record of who showed up, and when, and for whom." Kevin was not looking at the documents anymore. He was looking at the table directly in front of him. His hands were in his lap. He had the particular stillness of a man who is doing rapid internal accounting and does not like the figures he is arriving at. Stephanie was looking at me. She had not moved since I placed the binder on the table. She was the only person in the room whose expression had not cycled through confusion or defense. She simply looked at me with the focused attention of someone who had been waiting for something to be said out loud for a very long time. She did not speak. Her silence was its own kind of statement, and I felt it the way you feel a hand on your shoulder in a room where everyone else has stepped back. Jason was still looking at the table. I turned to tab 4. I did not read from the notebook aloud. I had decided against that before I came. Reading from a notebook felt like testimony, and I did not want to testify. I simply opened to the inside back cover, where the single line I had written the week before was visible at the top of the page, and I placed it in the center of the table alongside the visitor log. You were there. You remember correctly. The documents agree with you. My father read it. I watched his eyes move across the line. Then I closed the binder. I placed my hands flat on the cover, the way I had placed them the night before at my kitchen table, and I looked at the head of the table and said the thing I had been carrying for 6 years, in the specific, quiet way you carry something that you know you will eventually have to set down. I said, the answer is no. I will not be contributing $12,000. And I would like someone at this table to tell me, using that record, that log, and those numbers, exactly what sacrifice looks like to this family, because I have been trying to understand it for a very long time, and I think we have been using different definitions. Nobody answered. The vanilla candles burned. The mixed nuts sat untouched on the sideboard, and in the silence that followed, the long, complete, irreversible silence of a room full of people who have just been handed the truth and cannot give it back, I sat at the end of the table, closest to the kitchen, where I had always sat, and I waited. Stop with me here. Dana just placed 6 years of documented truth on that table, a visitor log with blank lines where her family's names should have been, $67,000 of sacrifice her mother said never existed, and a notebook that remembered everything they forgot. If this story reminded you that the truth does not expire, it simply waits. Drop in the comments. Subscribe if you haven't already. The next 20 minutes is where 6 years of patience finally finishes what it started. The first person to speak was not who I expected. I had imagined, in the various versions of this moment I had rehearsed over 6 years, that my father would speak first. That was his pattern: to absorb a challenge briefly and then reassert, to find the angle that returned control to him, to reframe the information as something other than what it was. I had prepared for that. I had answers ready. But my father did not speak first. Kevin did. He said quietly and without looking up, "Why didn't you tell us?" The room shifted. I looked at him. He had his hands in his lap and his eyes on the table, and he was asking the question the way people ask questions when they already sense that the answer is going to require something of them. I said, "I told you I was having brain surgery. You asked me about a financial advisor." He nodded. A very small nod, the kind that is not agreement so much as acknowledgement. The painful acknowledgement of a person who has just watched a specific memory reassemble itself into a shape he does not recognize. He did not say anything else for a long time. My mother was the second. She had been sitting very still since I placed the visitor log on the table, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes moving between the 2 pages in their plastic sheet protectors, and some point on the wall behind my left shoulder. She had the look of a woman performing composure, the effortful stillness of someone who is holding something back, not because she does not feel it, but because she does not yet know what it is. When she spoke, her voice was careful, measured in the way that voices are when the person using them is aware that words, once released, cannot be recalled. She said, "Dana, I did not know you had requested the visitor log." I said, "I know." She said, "I did not know that document existed." I said, "It has always existed. I just now have a copy." A pause. Then she said, and her voice changed on this sentence, dropped, and became something I had not heard from her before. something that had the texture of a much older woman than the one I had known. I told myself that you were managing, that you were capable, and that you had Gloria, and that you did not need us the way some people need family. I told myself that was the same as being fine. She stopped. I waited. She said, I think I told myself that because it was easier than the other thing. I did not ask her what the other thing was. I did not need to. She meant that showing up would have required her to prioritize me over the story she had been telling about me for years, the story where I was capable and dramatic and always landed on my feet, and that the story had been more comfortable than the hospital. I sat with that. I did not absolve her. I did not tell her it was all right. I am an occupational therapist. I understand the difference between acknowledgement and resolution. What she had offered was acknowledgement, and I received it as that, precisely, and without inflation. I said, I know. My father did not apologize. I want to be honest about that, because I think it would be dishonest to construct a version of the story where he did something he did not do. He sat at the head of the table for a long time after my mother finished speaking, and then he picked up the summary page from tab 2, the one with the $67,000 figure, and he read it again, slowly, from top to bottom. Then he set it down. He looked at me with an expression I can only describe as the expression of a man who has spent his entire life measuring people by their yield and has just been presented with a ledger he did not commission and cannot argue with. He said, You kept all of this. I said, Yes. He said, For 6 years. I said, Yes. He said, For 6 years. I said, Yes. He looked at the binder. Then he looked at his hands on the table. A long moment passed in which I watched my father encounter the possibility that the verdict he had carried about me my entire life was not a verdict at all, but an assumption, and that assumptions, unlike documents, do not hold up under review. He did not say he was wrong. My father was not built for that sentence. But he did something I had not seen him do at a family table in 39 years of sitting at the far end of it. He was quiet, and he stayed quiet, and he did not try to fill it. For my father, that was the equivalent of everything. Jason looked up. It was the first time since the meeting began that he had fully raised his eyes from the table, and when he did, I saw what I had suspected from the moment I walked in. That he was not surprised. Not by the binder, not by the visitor log, not by the $67,000. He had known the shape of this family's accounting for a long time. He had simply been the one who benefited from it, and had chosen comfort over clarity, the way people do when clarity is expensive, and comfort is right there. He looked at me and said, Dana, I am sorry. 2 words, 4 syllables, and I believed him. Not because he had earned belief easily or because 2 words were sufficient for 6 years, but because I know what it costs a person to say something true in front of their parents, and I watched it cost him. And I gave the apology the weight it deserved, which was not everything, but was not nothing. I nodded. I did not tell him the apology changed my answer. It didn't. Stephanie spoke last. She had been silent for the entirety of the meeting. Her notepad was closed. Her pen was set beside it at a precise angle. She looked at me from across the table with the expression I had been trying to read since I set the binder down, and now I could read it clearly. It was recognition. She said, I have been sitting at this table for 11 years, and I have watched this family tell a story about you that never matched the person I was watching. The room absorbed that. She said, I am glad it is on paper. Heaven looked at his wife. Something moved across his face. Not shame exactly, but the close relative of it. The recognition that the person who had seen most clearly had been sitting beside him the whole time, and that her clarity was a reflection of his own failure to look. He reached over and put his hand over hers on the table. I looked at that gesture for a moment. Then I closed my bag. I did not put the binder away. I left it on the table, open to the visitor log. Because I had decided before I came that I would not be carrying it back out of that house. It had served its purpose. It could stay. I stood up. My mother said, "Dana, please don't," I said. "I am not leaving in anger, Mom. I am leaving because I said what I came to say, and I have to get home to Marcus." I picked up my bag, lighter now without the binder, and I pushed my chair in. I looked at the table one last time. The visitor log was still face up in the center, the blank lines very white under the dining room light. I looked at my father. He was still looking at his hands. I said, "I was there. I remember correctly." Then I walked through the dining room, past the sideboard with the vanilla candles and the untouched bowl of mixed nuts, down the hallway where my school photographs still hung in identical frames, and out the front door, into the gray Ohio afternoon. I sat in my car. I did not cry. I had cried for this family at many points over 39 years, and I was not going to do it in their driveway. I started the engine. I drove home. Marcus was at the kitchen table when I got home. He was 13 by then, doing homework with his headphones around his neck and a half-eaten apple on the plate beside him, and he looked up when I came through the door the way he always looked up, fully, openly, without the guardedness that most teenagers develop and that I sometimes thought Marcus had simply decided was not worth the effort. He said, "How was Grandma and Grandpa's?" I set my bag, lighter, without the binder, on the counter. I said, "Honest." He considered this. Then he nodded and put his headphones back on, which was exactly the right response. And I stood in my kitchen for a moment and looked at him and thought about $31,000 in a college savings account and felt, for the first time in a long time, that I had spent my money correctly. Jason's restaurant closed 4 months later. Not because of my refusal. The $47,000 would not have saved it. The problems were structural, and I think on some level Jason had known that before he called the family meeting. He needed the money, yes. But he also needed someone to say out loud that the way this family allocated its resources had never been about merit or need or sacrifice. It had been about narrative. And narratives, I have learned, are expensive to maintain. He called me 6 weeks after the meeting. It was a Thursday evening and Marcus was at soccer practice, and I was sitting on my back porch with a cup of tea when my phone rang. He did not apologize again. We had moved past that. He asked how I was. I told him honestly. He told me honestly about the restaurant, about Courtney, about the particular exhaustion of having spent years being the favored one, and realizing too late that favoritism is its own kind of cage. It requires you to keep performing the role that earned it, and the performance never ends. I listened. I did not offer solutions. I am an occupational therapist. I know the difference between a person who needs an answer and a person who needs to be heard. Before he hung up, he said, "The binder is still at Mom and Dad's. On the dining room table, nobody moved it." I said, "They can keep it." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I looked up your bar admission. The public one. For Occupational Therapy Board certification." I said, "I know." He said, "You have never been what they said you were." I said, "I know that too." Kevin called 3 weeks after Jason. His call was shorter and more practical, which was consistent with who he was. He asked if I would send him a copy of the Tab 2 summary, the financial record. I asked him why. He said, "Because I want to put it somewhere I will see it." I sent it. I do not know where he put it. I did not ask. But something shifted in Kevin after that Saturday, and while I would not describe us as close, we are not close, and I am no longer investing energy in becoming what this family was not built to be. I will say that he started calling on Marcus's birthday, not texting. Calling. The first time he called, Marcus looked at the phone screen, then at me, and said, "Uncle Kevin?" I said, "Answer it." He did. My mother called on a Tuesday 5 weeks after the meeting. I did not answer the first time. I am human and there are limits to how quickly a person can move from documentation to conversation, and I needed the time between those two things to be mine. I called her back on a Thursday. We talked for 40 minutes. Not about the binder, not about the visitor log, not about the surgery. We talked about Marcus's upcoming school presentation, about a book she was reading, about the weather which had finally turned toward spring. Before she hung up, she said, "I am going to do better." She did not specify what better meant or better than what. She did not need to. I understood the sentence in its full dimension, which was that she was not promising resolution. She was promising attention. For my mother, after 68 years of prioritizing peace over truth, that was a significant promise. I said, "Okay, Mom." I meant it. My father did not call. 12 weeks after the meeting, he appeared at my door on a Saturday morning with no warning and no explanation. He was holding a paper bag from the bakery 3 blocks from my parents' house, the one Marcus and I had gone to when he was small, the one with the almond croissants that Marcus had loved since he was 4 years old. He held out the bag. He said, "I did not know what else to bring." I stood in the doorway for a moment. Then I stepped back and let him in. We sat at my kitchen table. He had a coffee. Marcus came downstairs and stopped in the doorway, surprised. And my father looked at him with an expression I had never seen my father use on me, but recognized immediately. It was the expression of a man who has recently revised something fundamental and is still learning to wear the revision. He said, "Your mother tells me you are good at science." Marcus said carefully, "I am pretty good at it." My father said, "Tell me about that." Marcus looked at me. I nodded once. He sat down and told his grandfather about science for 25 minutes. And my father listened the way I had wanted him to listen to me my entire life. Fully, without the ledger, without the yield calculation, without the verdict already written. I stood at the kitchen counter and watched them and did not say anything. Some things do not require commentary. By April, the binder was gone from my parents' dining room table. My mother told me she had moved it. Not thrown it away, moved it. She had put it in the cedar chest at the foot of the guest room bed, the one that had belonged to her mother, the one she reserved for things she considered permanent. I did not ask her to explain that decision. I understood it the way I understood most things about my mother, imperfectly, and with more grace than I had managed in earlier years. I had built the binder to be seen. She had put it somewhere, it would be kept. I decided that was enough. 3 months after the meeting, I rearranged my living room. This is a small detail, and I include it because small details are where real life actually lives. Not in the dramatic moments which pass, but in the ordinary Tuesday afternoons that follow them, when you are moving furniture and realize that you are doing it without asking anyone's permission or imagining anyone's reaction, and that this feeling, this particular unwitnessed freedom, is what you were building toward the whole time. I moved the couch to face the window instead of the television. Marcus walked in, looked at it, and said, "I like it better." I said, "Me too." Gloria came for dinner on the last Friday of April. She brought a lemon cake, which she brought to every significant occasion in her life and mine, and she sat at my kitchen table and listened to the full version of the Saturday meeting for the first time. I had told her pieces before. This was the first time I told it beginning to end. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I want you to know something. The morning of your surgery, before they took you back, you squeezed my hand. And I thought, this woman is going to be fine. Not because of the surgery. Because of what I could feel in that grip. You already knew you were going to come through it." I looked at her across the table. She said, "I have been waiting 6 years to tell you that your family missed something irreplaceable, and I have been waiting just as long to tell you that some of us did not." I reached across and held her hand the way she had held mine in that pre-op room, and we sat like that for a while. And the lemon cake was excellent, and the window was open, and the air smelled like April in Ohio, which smells like something beginning. In May, I planted a window box, tomatoes and herbs, because Marcus had asked if we could grow something, and I had said yes before I finished thinking about it, which I have found is how the best decisions happen. We planted them on a Saturday morning, Marcus reading the seed packet instructions with the seriousness he brought to all technical information, me following his directions without amendment. By June, 3 of the tomato plants were producing. The basil was extraordinary. Marcus photographed it every few days on his phone with a careful scientific attention that made me think, not for the first time, that he was going to be very good at whatever he decided to do with his life. He had $31,000 in a college savings account and a grandfather who was learning to ask him questions. He had Gloria's lemon cake and Beth's soup and a mother who kept good records. He was going to be fine. I was going to be fine. We already were. I learned one thing from that November surgery that I am not sure I would have learned any other way. I learned that documentation is not the same as bitterness, that keeping a record does not mean you are living in the past. It means you are refusing to let the past be rewritten by people who were not paying attention when it happened. There is a difference between holding a grudge and holding a fact. Grudges are about pain. Facts are about accuracy. And accuracy, I have found, is one of the most radical things a quiet person can bring into a room. I also learned this. The people who show up when it costs them something are the ones whose names deserve to be on the page. Gloria showed up 4 times. She did not have to. She had her own life, her own calendar, her own reasons not to drive 40 minutes to sit in a hospital room with a woman's 6-year-old son. She came anyway, and in the years since, I have tried to build my life around the glorious. The people who do not need a binder to prove their presence, because their presence is already documented in the only record that matters, the one you carry in your body, the one that tells you, without words, who was there. That is my story. Documented, witnessed, permanent. If this story reminded you that the truth does not need to be loud to be powerful, that patience and accuracy and a 3-inch binder can say everything a raised voice never could, then share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe if you have not already. Every week on Calm Drama Stories, we sit with the women who kept the receipts, who remembered correctly, who waited until the moment was right, and then, calmly, set the record straight. I will see you in the next one.